I would like to give you an opportunity to talk to us about maybe some aspects of the Green New Deal that we haven't had a chance to discuss today, specifically as it relates to things like city planning, the type of homes we live in, the type of streets we have, those small human day-to-day details that make such a big difference that we never think about.
Yeah, so for example, let's see, where could I start? So like in South Florida, there's more of an emphasis on single family homes. And it's kind of problematic because as property values rise over time, these single family homes are becoming more unattainable, especially when more appropriate types of housing are appropriate. If you're single, right, and you're just working, you don't need an entire house to yourself. And usually a lot of working class people, they have to share housing. They have to share, like it would be better if there was like more multi-family housing, if there were more like studio apartments, but that's not the most profitable thing. The most profitable thing is for developers to take large amounts of land and convert it like to basically urban sprawl, so cul-de-sacs. So that's one main problem. Another problem would be, which what Jeff mentioned, was the mass transportation. I think right now, I don't know the details, but in Miami, they're basically expanding the roads. They're expanding the roads, the highways, instead of investing more money in public transportation. And it's a problem because if you increase the amount of vehicles, you're only going to increase the amount of traffic. And I'm open to taking questions.
Anyone on the panel or in the audience want to ask any questions on this particular subject for Rogelio? Please, Nick.
One of the main things that smart development should follow is mixed-use development. And actually, builders don't make more money by building big houses and selling big lots. If you can take and convince them to use smaller footprints with mixed-use development, so you can put businesses down below, residences on top, and provide green space, large green spaces around those properties, that's an amenity that attracts people to those types of development, because it gives you the opportunity of having local businesses that you can walk to or ride your bike to easily, rather than having to jump in your car and drive 3 or 4 or 5 miles or more to buy a gallon of milk. Okay,
yeah.
This is what we need to concentrate on. If you ever followed the smart growth plans, I subscribed to their books about, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 years ago. I got all their books and I studied them. And when I sat on my city's planning and zoning board, I tried to convince them to convince their developers that came in to go with that mixed-use development and to rezone for them. They will make more money providing a bunch of small units and the businesses on the ground and walking distances for their clients that are going to buy their properties. It's a win-win situation all the way around.
Yeah, the thing is, this mixed-use development is becoming more popular, and I think compact growth has to be a priority because, like, population is growing. People from other states are coming to Florida, and there's going to be a point where, I focus on South Florida, and there's going to be a point where they can't grow, like the urban growth can occur past. You have like the Everglades to the west, and you have the Atlantic Ocean to the east.
Yeah, I live down there, I know.
Yeah, so there's going to be a point where they can't expand anymore. They're going to have to grow more compactly.
Yeah.
The problem with that, even though it's like mixed use is becoming more popular, there's still like obstacles. And the problem is, first of all, like companies, they tend not to want to deal with like commercial people that manage commercial properties and people that manage the residential, they tend not to mix together. That's one problem. And another problem is that, like, changing the structure, like the commercial structure, it's not as, like, using a mixed-use development. It's going to be harder to find. It's going to be harder to find tenants for, like, commercial tenants. It's going to be harder to find to attract commercial tenants, especially if they're used to a certain like big box model, big box chain model.
The thing of it is that when you follow that type of development model, what you do is you have to focus on your local city. Okay.
Actually, I want to take the ball right here and move the conversation along a little bit. So, Howie, you come from Nashville. You ran on the Green New Deal sometimes before. My understanding of the original New Deal is that one of the strengths of it was that it was federally funded but locally controlled. How can we ensure that, we have this conversation here between two people who we believe are both good Greens, who both think they have the best interest in mind of environmentalism? How can we make sure that these solutions aren't imposed by someone outside of our community who hasn't studied the issues? And this is the argument that we're going to hear back, is that this is a big giant government takeover. How would you respond to that? How would you answer that?
Well, let me just talk about different sectors, because to me, the Green New Deal's got to redo all the productive sectors, not just the production of energy, but how all the sectors use energy. You can't get to 100% clean energy unless we redo transportation, for example. You want to have mixed-use communities, you need to build a transportation system that allows for redensification of urban space. You got to build apartment buildings, mixed-use projects around the hubs and spokes of a rail network, which means intra-city mass transit, intercity high-speed rails, and also freight rails on separate tracks. So now, how you plan the details of how that more dense, walkable community is designed, that should be the local people. But you'll never get a rail network without nationalizing the rail corporations. You can't rely on Southern Pacific, CSX, Amtrak to figure this out. I know if anybody's been on the rails, the passengers are supposed to have priority. But in fact, they got to wait for coal trains. I've had people, tell me they're on Amtrak and they wait like 3 hours so some damn coal train, we call them bomb trains out of the Bakken region where they're fracking for oil up there in North Dakota, pass it down the tracks. And of course, those big, heavy tankers, make it harder for the rail traffic, and they can't go as fast. So you can't do that without a national planning of the system. And then you provide a framework within which we can do local planning. Take another thing, we should have a public energy system. We can't leave it to the Duke Energies and the National Grids, as we call it, National Grid, to plan out renewable energy system, because they got coal plants, they got gas plants, they got nuclear power plants that they want to run into the ground. I mean, they're willing to run the nukes. And they may melt down before we shut them down, and they should be shut down before they melt down.
Right.
So you can have a national interstate renewable energy system. You need it. Nashville, for example, wind is intermittent in localities, but across the country, the wind's always blowing somewhere. So you need a system that gets the wind all around so you can balance supply and demand. Utilities like dumb grids, and we need a smart grid in order to have distributed production of energy from renewable sources, sun, wind, tides, hydro. So you need a smart grid. So you put a solar panel on your house, and when you got surplus, you sell it back to the utility. The utilities operating at cost for public benefit instead of for the profit of absentee shareholders, you can handle that. But if it wants simple profits, their model is build the most expensive power plants you can, and you got more investment in your rate base, and you get a certain percentage of that cost plus as the profits for the company. That is a system of expansion, not sustainability. So you have a national public energy system, but it should be bottom-up planned. So you should have local public energy districts. The board's elected by the people, and they do the detailed planning. How much rooftop solar are we going to depend on, and how much solar farms, how much micro wind, and how much large wind. Are we going to have energy storage? You can do that, with these big batteries on a block-by-block basis, for example. rather than relying on every individual to put one in their basement. All that stuff, that's what the local people should plan. And then it should be coordinated from the bottom up. So the local boards set up a state board, and from there, a federal board. There was a model of that coming out of the New Left for public energy system. Jeff Foe, Lee Webb wrote it, old SDS people. And Lee Metcalf, Democratic Senator from Montana, put it in the congressional record. It's December 18th, 1974, this whole model for a state energy system. And in there was a state fuel corporation where instead of having Exxon and Chevron and all these people taking their fossil fuel profits and reinvesting them in more fossil fuel extraction, they'd have to sell it to the state fuel corporation, which would distribute natural gas, gasoline, home heating oil, kerosene, whatever was distributed in the state. And those profits, instead of going back to the investment in more fossils, could be used to develop renewables. And so we've had this model sitting around on the shelf. Unfortunately, the congressional record isn't online yet, so you got to go to the library, get your librarian to get it. But it's a piece of legislation that gives a model. So, and I'll just do one more example. Works Progress Administration back in the 30s, local communities planned the jobs. Federal government provided 90% of the money. So most of it was public works, but you had the cultural projects like the slave narratives or the murals on the post offices that the public works people were building. So they put cultural people to work and historians to work. And all that was planned locally, and the local governments, it was usually county or a metro region, will put in 10%, the feds will put in 90%. So you get protection against boondoggles, locality just taking federal money and paying people for no-show jobs. You got to put the skin in it, then it's going to be for real. So that model, I think, can work. So we need bottom-up planning when we need to go large scale. But we need to remember that local people know their local conditions best, so it should be like a federal model. And the detailed planning can be done at the locality.
Does anyone on the panel have anything to say to that? They want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to add that we need to be cautious about private-public enterprises. I can give the example in South Florida of the Bright Line, which is going to reach, right now it operates from Miami to West Palm Beach and is going to expand to Orlando. And the problem with that is that it's privately owned. I think it was sold, I've heard that it was sold to a Virgin. And it's problematic because they have taken public money for that project. And even though it's necessary to increase to build up a rail system, it's I feel like I've been in the Bright Line, I've ridden the train, and it's a nice experience, but it's kind of elitist. They don't even take cash, they only take card, and it's pretty pricey. It's not affordable for a lot of people. So I think we can have all these things, all this infrastructure, but it has to be from the bottom up. You gotta be careful about the implementation.
So that hits on something, the two of you hit on something that I want to go to Jeff, but Jeff has something to say first.
Yeah, I think this is sort of in line with what Howie was saying, but maybe a little different. I think the problem is we got too many ideas and too little power. And that if the people had the power, we would come up with the ideas. So, for instance, we got to break the back of Exxon and its ilk. We're talking about beating the most powerful forces in the world in human history.
You actually literally hit on the question I was going to ask you, so I want to set the question so that people will know where I'm coming from with that. I know you once told me that you were involved in the Youngstown auto plant, and what went on there with
the Vega plant.
Exactly. So when Robin and I began our tour of the GPFL, the thing we kept hearing over and over and over again is, one of the primary solutions we need to get into thinking about nationalization. It's the same thing. Nationalizing the energy sector, nationalizing the transportation sector. You know what happens when the people come for the corporation's issue to take it from them. How do we create an environment whereby these absolutely necessary steps can actually be taken because we demand them?
I think the environment's going to come for us first. So we say, well, we got to do this, that, and the other by 2030. We have to do whatever by 2050. I believe, from what I know about human historical event development, we ain't gonna do it. So what we're talking about doing that's already developing is we're gonna be doing what we have to do in the midst of catastrophe, not to head off catastrophe. And that is going to unleash social forces that are revolutionary, fascistic. There's going to be major events happening around the world completely out of our control, with millions of displaced people, powerful people ready to kill those millions. And how do we navigate that kind of an environment? I think we got to start looking at that kind of stuff. So, for instance, with the Green New Deal, well, in a way, to now break it down a little bit, we don't need to push for the Green New Deal and then add healthcare to it. We got to be fighting for healthcare now. Got to be fighting for education now. Got to fight for living wage now. And all these things that have kind of, well, these are our various things we need. We're fighting for them. We have this coalition. Suddenly, what the Green New Deal does is puts all these things, all these issues, on a terrifying human scale that people can no longer not deal with. So it's both disastrous and an opportunity.
I've got a question for Robin next, but first of all, does anyone on the panel or the audience want to respond to that? Vic?
In other words, what you're saying, if you break it all down, is if we don't do something about climate change, people are going to be killing people. It's happening already. The people that we have,
Yes.
the immigrants that are trying to get into our country now, the immigrants that are trying to get into the European states that are being turned back, drowned, and everything else, okay? This is going to be going on throughout the entire world. Right here in the United States, it's going to be going on. And our first priority is to stop climate change, because with climate change, you stop food sources and you stop water sources. And nothing else in the new Green Deal is going to happen until we stop climate change. Otherwise, we're gone.
And you engage
2030,
these
we're gone.
other issues, because that's how we're going to stop climate change.
I would love to bring Robin in on this, and just so you guys know where I've been going in is how long it's been since the last person gave a presentation. Really hadn't spoken. Howie spoke first. Jeff was after that, so now Robin was our last presenter. So when you and I first started discussing the Green New Deal, you were not impressed, and we talked a little bit about it, and I think I may have moved you in the right direction. And so we have the legacy of the original New Deal and things like the highway program that ripped up black neighborhoods because they were the most vulnerable communities, and if you need a bunch of land to take from someone, so you should take from poor communities and things like that. What do we need to add to our Green New Deal, or what do we need to implement to make sure that that these things don't happen again? Because if we find one community being targeted, then that particular community is going to fight back against the political changes that are necessary to make the environmental change possible. So what are some of the things that, that's a pretty broad question there, but I'll give you a chance to open up to us.
Okay, I'm going to see if I can narrow it down. So one of my concerns, I know that when I came into the party, Jill was running the Green New Deal, and it was still a piece of legislation. And now we have Howie, who also was I guess the correct word would be sponsor of that. And so my concern or my challenge to both would be that we could expand it, because it kind of has the feel of white environmentalism. And so if we want to be inclusive, I think there are other dimensions that we should go, i.e., we have, and kind of Jeff, everybody's kind of already hit on it, we are faced with hurricane and what I like to call hurricane and disaster gentrification. And especially here in Florida. And I'm kind of going to scatter back to what LeBeau said. So one thing that we did was, not only did I have concerns, but we were doing a tour of our affiliates. And so West Palm Beach was our first stop. And we brought to the table those folks from that chapter. And they brought some amazing language to what could be something specific for Florida. And I think it's important that with the Green New Deal, that we hear those voices that are actually being impacted by some of the issues that the Green New Deal may touch on, but I don't think we can speak to, or it can speak to a lot of the issues because they may not be impacted by it. And so I was very impressed by those voices that we heard. Aaron was, if you want your future, home designer, Aaron, I was kind of scared about how he was designing the houses, but it was some wonderful information. And so I think it's missing some voices. I don't think that the AOC deal is the ultimate, but some of the language does speak to her efforts with working with activism. And I don't think that legislation can be properly heard if we're letting this Congress write it for us. So if that kind of answers it or kind of sparks some dialogue, I think that we should talk about bringing other voices to the table, especially as it relates to a Florida deal, to be more specific, because we're about to go under Florida, as well as Texas. I couldn't probably talk about this until my experience that I had in Texas when I was caught in the hurricane in Texas. And then I came back, when I finally made it out of Texas, then I came back home here to Florida, which Texas is my home, by the way, I'm from Texas, but came back home to Florida only to be caught in another hurricane, and we're in Orlando did not suffer maybe from water or drowning or whatever like that, but we had the perils of Duke Energy. We were without power for weeks. And then locally, we were deprived of, or we were victimized by our debris not being picked up for months. And so many people were sick just from the spores and stuff like that. So I think it's important to acquire all the voices so that we can present proper legislation. That makes sense.
Yes.
Do we have any more questions for the panel right now before I ask another question to keep the conversation moving forward? All right, I've got a question I want to get. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joe.
How can we implement plastic to resolve the issue of plastic in the ocean with the Green New Deal?
Is there anyone who wants to volunteer to take an answer to that question? Howard, please.
Well, when I said we need to redo all sectors of production, that would include what we use plastic for. Plastics is based on petrochemical. We use plastics instead of hemp, for example, thanks to DuPont, which got hemp included in with the, reefer madness stuff, which it has nothing to do with. It's just the same, close relative, but it's good for food and fiber. And they wanted to do synthetic, so they basically made an agricultural competitor illegal. And the thing about if you use, hemp cloth, you can even make plastics from agricultural feedstocks that are biodegradable.
You can.
And so instead of having plastics accumulate in the environment, because there are no enzymes that co-evolve with these synthetic chemicals, unlike organic chemicals in the biosphere, they don't break down. Some of them are endocrine disruptors. In other words, they screw up your hormones. Others just bioaccumulate. I mean, there are fish in the ocean and half their weight is plastic now because of the way they consume, their prey, which might be phytoplankton, little microscopic organisms. And so we got to stop producing this stuff. And as Barry Commoner used to say, and he's the one who pointed out the difference between the synthetics and those chemicals that are out there in the environment. So a classic example is soap, which is basically made from fats, versus detergent, which uses synthetics. Detergent doesn't break down, plus it has synthetic phosphorus and nitrogen that accumulates in rivers, and you get algae blooms and so forth. Soaps are absorbed much more easily by the environment. So he was saying what we need to do is not just regulate, but ban things that screw up the environment. We did that with lead and gasoline. We did that with those chemicals that were destroying the ozone layer with the Montreal Protocol back in the late 80s. That's how we deal with plastics. It's just got to be, we got the know-how to provide other ways of, what we do with most plastic is just wrapping something up or a plastic bag to carry it. I mean, we solved that problem when we were cavemen and women, right? It's not that big a deal. It's not rocket science. And we just got to stop using synthetics that destroy the environment. And the way to do that is, you mandate it, like we might do with energy with a clean energy portfolio. The market-based people say, let's put a carbon tax and let the market work. Yeah, well, just to use an analogy, I worked at UPS on local trucks, right? And they could have automated us, but they were paying us so damn little, it just made more sense to keep paying us more. When wages go up, then they bring in technology to get more productive. Same thing with new technologies with respect to the environment. You gotta force the situation by just saying you can't foul up our nest. So that's what I would do with plastics. Is just we phase them out by a certain deadline, and you can't, like we just got plastic bags banned in New York State. Hell, the nation of China, which isn't exactly good on the environment, did it. I think India did it. I mean, they realized it way before us because we got a bunch of capitalists running this country who don't give a damn except about the next quarter's profits.
Yeah, we add investment in how to clean up the plastic that's already in the oceans and the waterways.
Well,
Science or something like that.
I would argue we need a civilian conservation corps like we had in the original New Deal.
Yeah.
Much bigger. Environmental cleanup, habitat restoration, to bring carbon back out of the atmosphere into the biosphere, which means reforestation, wetland restoration, down here mangrove restoration. If we get more densified urban areas where sprawl will eventually be replaced. It's already in some places where they overbuilt, or in a city like where I live at, more than half the homes in the community are abandoned or burned down or have been torn down. So we got coyotes and bears running around the inner city of Syracuse.
Here too.
It's an old factory town. So rehabbing old urbanized areas should be part of that. And that brings back habitat. One of the crises we face is that biodiversity is shrinking. It gets to a certain point, ecosystems collapse. Agriculture depends on ecosystems, and that threatens, our material standard of living. You start to get the nightmare that Jeff was talking about. So,
all right. So I'm gonna sort of the whole panel, and just whoever speaks first, please jump into it. What currently exists in the Green Party's Green New Deal that should be removed, or what is not in it that should be added? Specific points, specific ideas, specific policies. Jeff.
I think the economic package and the social justice package needs to be seriously beefed up. Because otherwise, it does come off as after the thought icing on the cake. And the fact is that the Green Party has moved as a collective body, has already moved beyond that. So that, for instance, I mean, when I'm talking to the DSA, for instance, you know, they were in this coalition who wanted to remove Green New Deal from the name of the coalition. And it was the DSAers, dedicated Democrats, you would think, that fought most vigorously against that in the name of the social justice package. So the basis of support is there, and in some ways we're in the lead, and in some ways other people are moving a little bit ahead of us.
I guess Rob, raise your hand first, and then you'll be next, Ms. Stack.
I guess to piggyback a little bit what Jeff said, but what comes to mind is too, as I think we heard today in the legislative wrap up, but I like for the Green New Deal to address preemption issues, but I guess more as it relates to, I'd like to hear it talk about more of maybe a national minimum income to a living wage that would eradicate folks from poverty and restore us to something dignified, living. I like for us to be more specific on that. AOC does kind of talk about it a little bit, but I'd like to hear us to really specify those needs.
Howie.
Well, you know, I first ran on this in 2010. We're coming out of the Great Recession. And I wanted to invoke the New Deal, which took government action, because what the Democrats and Republicans were saying, oh, tax revenues are down. We got to furlough workers, cut education spending. We got to go on austerity. So I call it the Hawkins prosperity plan versus the Cuomo austerity plan. And what I said was, and I've been saying ever since, is that we need to bring this economic bill of rights that Roosevelt talked about, State of the Union Address 44 and 45, but do it the way the Black Freedom Movement said we need to do it, with the March on Washington in 1963 for jobs and freedom, the Freedom Budget 1966, the Poor People's Campaign. And what did King say before he got to the dream? He said, we come here with a promissory note. As far as I'm concerned, while the reparations study, that's the down payment right now. And their strategy was, there's a white backlash mounting because these, white people, they're looking at the South, are anxious about the competition they're not going to get from black folks who got civil rights and equal access to public accommodations. And they're not supposed to be discriminated against in employment and education and housing. That was what the civil rights and A. Philip Randolph and Byron Rustin and those folks said. We got to lead a movement, a class-based movement, to give everybody economic security, so then these folks won't be after our civil rights. That was the strategy. Unfortunately, Randolph and Rustin relied on the Democratic Party. They had a landslide, Johnson creamed Goldwater, and Rustin wrote famously, we're moving from protest to politics, because now we got the electoral majority. Unfortunately, they escalated in Vietnam, and we lost the war on poverty in Vietnam. And Randolph, who had gone to jail with Eugene Debs as a Socialist Party leader during World War I, as a war resistor, and Rustin, who had resisted World War II because he wouldn't fight in the segregated army, they were silent on Vietnam, because that's what you do. When you're in the Democratic Party, you really can't criticize what they're doing if you're trying to get something else wrong. King, on the other hand, he stayed independent. The Poor People's Campaign was they're going to shut down Washington, so they got some of these things. And those rights included, when they're talking about economic bill of rights, employment, a guaranteed minimum income, jobs or income now, join, that was a big slogan. 500,000 units of affordable housing a year until, as they put it, slums are cleared. Comprehensive health care, that's the national health insurance, we call it single payer today, that have been on the agenda since the mid-30s, at least in parts of the Roosevelt administration. And a good education is the way Roosevelt put it in the State of the Union addresses. That means a good public education. And today that means pre-K and it means college, not just K through 12. So that, and that's what I ran on. And then I would say, we call it the Green New Deal because the public investment we need to make is in this clean energy because we got a climate issue and we got an environmental problem. And that's how we get the economy moving again. So we always lead with that, but the damn reporters are lazy, and when they hear green, they sometimes say, oh, this is about climate. And so the Green New Deal, mostly what they talk about, even though AOC and Markey, and we appreciate this, kept the job thing and the income guarantee and Medicare for all in their non-binding resolution. So they kept that link. But what does the corporate media talk about? It's all about the energy piece. So we got to keep articulating that this is economic justice or economic security and climate protection. And politically, and I agree with Jeff on this, we can't get any of that unless we keep that link. Because the people who are struggling, they're like, why should I take a risk for the climate when I can't even pay the rent this month? So we've got to give those people reassurance. And then where you get the most resistance is like in the building trades and the utility unions, because they feel like on these pipelines, these gas pipelines, it's like the building trades say, well, their jobs are for our people. And even though you can show them, and they can't argue with you, that you get more jobs per dollar invested in wind, solar, retrofitting buildings, ground source heat pumps to replace the natural gas, and so forth. What we need to also offer them is a just transition. Like 5 years guaranteed wages and benefits until they find comparable work. But this Green New Deal, and we're doing a budget on it, I mean, we're up to 23 million jobs. If you look at the highest measure of unemployment, it's 15.6 million now. So, we're going to have people moving here to this country to do that work, and that's construction work, laborers, as well as, some of the more engineering and skill jobs that are part of that. So, I think it's very important that the Green New Deal be economic security or economic justice and climate protection, or we won't get any of them.
Do you have any questions? Please.
I do. Right off from the beginning, and I think a little bit of what, Howie, you're saying, I heard about smart growth. I heard a new one, compact growth. We all know about green growth and managed growth. They all have one thing in common. My concern is even a 3% increase in GDP means that the economic throughput doubles in only 24 years. That really isn't sustainable, no matter how we divvy up that stuff. We just don't have enough planet to continually extract doubling of resources in 20 some years. So my question is, what does the Green Party's Green New Deal say about degrowth, or on the other hand, growth or GDP itself?
Does anyone want to take this? All right.
We need a whole new set of social indicators. Growth is measured by amount we sell, gross domestic product. And that includes good things and bad things. If you sell gasoline and then people get asthma or lung disease, then you spend money treating them, and we grew. But is that better quality of life? So there have been people like Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel Prize winner, said we need a new set of indicators so we have a better measure. You can think of capital. There's the physical capital that produces. There's a financial capital, which when you can't make profitable investments in productive assets, you buy shares and you manipulate financial assets and rearrange who owns what we got. And so there are a lot of sales of stocks and bonds with no addition of wealth to society. It's all distorted. And then the natural capital, the aquifers and the forests and the things that we depend on to have a human economy is that natural capital, that's the environment. We don't have measures for that in our social indicators. So the old socialist slogan, production for use, and I think we need to say within ecological limits so we're not depleting resources or overburdening them with throughput that is pollution. And what all that requires is at least the major means of production means socially owned democratic development, so we can produce enough so people get their basic needs met. And then when we get productive enough, maybe we work less because we got enough. That means goods are durable rather than plan for obsolescence, so you can keep turning over and you grow, but the quality of life doesn't improve. We need a whole lot of rethinking in that regard. And I don't know whether that's part of the Green New Deal or the Green Platform. I think we should require companies to have a labor time accounting system next to the financial accounting system. Because, we've had experiments, Paul Glover up in Ithaca, the Ithaca hours. It's an old socialist idea that everybody makes the average social production. You make it more vigorous when you're younger, but when you're older, you're still contributing. Everybody gets a voucher for the labor time they put in, and then they go use that to buy what's been produced in proportion to the work they do. And that would be one sector. The other sector is everybody has free access to things everybody ought to have, like education and healthcare. And the social movement hasn't talked about that. It was talked about in the 1900s, and since then it's mostly been about who owns it, collective ownership and so forth. But I think we need to bring that back, and maybe the way to start doing it is have labor time accounting, and then people will see how exploited they are. The labor time value of a product they're buying versus the amount of time they're putting into producing. And where there have been studies of that, basically we get about half the value that we create at work. And the rich folks are taking, from every one of us, half that value. So, long answer, but I think the questions you're raising we have to bring up. Because you're right, you just say smart growth, sustainable growth, you're basically saying we're going to grow by capitalist measures without improving our quality of life or really protecting the environment.
James?
Kind of hard to build off of what Ken was referring to, essentially that suicidal cult of growth. Everything has to be about grow, 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 until we're basically, and that's what's bringing us into this disaster. But one of the things to keep in mind is the concept of the metabolic rift, how the Green New Deal, you had already talked about plastic bags, about changing away from destructive plastics that can't be metabolized by nature itself, and replacing them with things that actually are part of the ecological cycle and restoring the ecology. So I didn't know if you could speak about how the Green New Deal addresses metabolic rift.
Anyone want to take that question? All right, we're going to accept that one as a comment. James,
Okay.
Question back here.
I'd like to see the Green Party in its platform endorse state banks as an avenue to finance local green initiatives. Public can invest through savings and through taking out loans. And we all know the advantages of state banks. And I don't know if there is, I don't think there is any endorsement of state banks.
I'd like to, if I could, go this one to Rogelio, working inside of county government. Do you know anything about state banks? Do you ever explored the idea? Do you have an idea of how that might change your work environment or the environment of the students that are around you and things like that? Do you have a state bank, or is that not something you put a lot of thought into?
I haven't put a lot of thought into it, but something that's semi-related is that there isn't a lot of control of public money. Like there isn't a lot of public control of public money. Is that a lot of private companies, they see the public sector as like a kind of like a captive market, and it's kind of like a money opportunity, like an opportunity to make money. So I wish there's more public control.
So following that up and going back to the Green New Deal, how do we prevent this? I mean, we talk about nationalization, but how do we prevent the Green New Deal from becoming a piggy bank for the corporate interests at large, who just swoop things up in giant contracts? And for example, when we were talking about the Green New Deal in Palm Beach County, a member from the Sierra Club was saying that it's not enough to just nationalize the power grid if it's one big giant grid that's sending electricity up across the country, because we lose half our electricity through the actual going through the wires. That we need to decentralize and defocus. How do we prevent the Green New Deal from just becoming a giant payday from some rich capitalist who just siphons it off into his own pie? And this is the question for anyone who wants to speak on. Jeff.
It will. I mean, read the capitalist press and the European press and stuff like that. Significant sections of the blood-sucking bourgeoisie are fully endorsing the dangers of climate change and green energy and this stuff. It's actually pretty deep. And it's going to get deeper. And I think, politically speaking, we have to be very aggressive in how we put together what I would call a working class Green New Deal. And we have to put it forward aggressively because they're going to do it. There's going to be, so the Green, the Roosevelt New Deal, part of how they did it was there were parts of international capital that saw they had the opportunity of basically taking over the British and French empires as World War II was on the horizon. And so they could invest, and they did, and they were right, and they were in a de facto alliance with, for instance, the Communist Party. But that was in a point where the empire was expandable. Now we're in a position where that has run out. We're in a period of contraction and implosion where the last piggy bank has been robbed. And that's going to be the fight, is the Green New Deal in the interest of which class? And if we don't put that forward very openly, I would say very eco-socialistically, they're going to kick our ass.
Going back to her Green New Deal, Montana, or the state banks, Montana has a state bank, and they were not affected.
North Dakota.
Yeah, North Dakota, I'm sorry. They were not affected by the recession. And when they first were established, it was for the purpose of funding electrical co-ops. For, communities would get together and they would establish their own co-op to provide their own electricity. That's something that we could look to as far as going solar on the rooftop is part, that could be something. But everything that they had, all of their cash assets and everything that the state owned was all part of the assets of establishing that bank. And the only thing that they funded was education for college students, electrical co-ops, and farmers.
Green elevator,
Yep.
Yeah, but they ended up funding the fossil fuel industry.
Well,
Put
yeah.
a lot of money into that. So that's the question. How do you manage the state banks to be sure it goes to where you want it to go? I mean, FDR had his own financing structure. I forget what it was called. And I know in the Green New Deal it proposes such a thing. And I think that component needs to be there. But how do you control it and make sure it goes where it's supposed to be?
I mean, that's the nature. I'm sorry, Howie wants to speak. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, democracy gives you a fighting chance. It's no guarantee. If we have public ownership and that public board is accountable to the people, then it's up to us to say we want it in renewables, not more fossil fuels. The problem with some of the public enterprises set up in the New Deal era, like TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, Bonneville, they're very top down. Under federal agencies, the people didn't elect the boards, they were appointed by the federal government, which is captured by capitalist interests. So they built nukes and coal plants. Back then, they weren't so much thinking about renewables. They were concerned they're going to run out of oil. But as the environmental issue came to the fore, it was really hard. I mean, we had to fight TVA on the nukes and on the coal plants. And Bonneville, I mean, remember Whoop? The Washington, they built a bunch of nukes and they bankrupted the whole public system because the nukes were not economically viable. The acronym for that public agency was WOPPS, Washington State something. So we just called it Whoops. Because they whoops, we lost all the money. I think when we talk about financing, first thing we got to say is it's better to tax the rich up front than to borrow money and then pay them interest for it. More progressive taxation. The inequality is off the charts. It's as bad as it's ever been in this country. And the super rich can pay more taxes. Wealth, income, wealth, estates, and income as well. There's money, talk about corporate boondoggles, the military industrial complex. There's more waste, fraud, and abuse there than, you buy $600 toilet seats and stuff like that. That's all boondoggle. And that's where the know-how of people with engineering know-how and so forth, that should be devoted to renewable energy, not more weapons of mass destruction. But after you do that, you're still going to have to do some financing, because we're talking, in the budget we're working on, $2 trillion a year building out, basically manufacturing again on a green, sustainable, zero-waste basis, and building out all the sectors, the trains, the transportation, the energy, organic agriculture, and that's going to require borrowing. That's long-term investment. So public banking is one way. You bypass Wall Street. They don't get the fees and commissions. The interest paid on those loans goes back to the public, not to the capitalists on Wall Street. So you can recycle that money into public benefit. And then there's also expanding the money supply, where, there are a couple ideas. One in the green platform, we call it green the dollar. That's the old greenback command from the 19th century, except now the Fed is where the money supply is controlled rather than private banks, who used to issue private bank loans. But our proposal is for debt-free money. In other words, we let the Treasury have the authority to create money, digital greenbacks or U.S. notes, the real greenbacks, and spend them into circulation. And that increases the money supply with the growth of commerce. That's debt-free. That's a radical change, because they're basically nationalizing the Federal Reserve System, putting it under the authority of the Treasury Department. The other thing that people talk about, you've heard of modern monetary theory, MMT.
Yeah.
I mean, we got people that I think they're a little misinformed. They think the Fed can just create money and spend it in the economy. Actually, that's not legal. The Treasury's got to sell bonds to get the cash, and they can spend it. They sell it on Wall Street. That's the primary market. Then the Fed can buy that. That's what we call quantitative easing on the secondary market. And we can do green QE, and this time bail out the people in the planet instead of the banks. But it's more expensive, because in the end, those bonds got to be paid back with interest by the taxpayers. So that's something. There are people out there, MMTers out there, that seem to think, there's a magical money tree. They are right in the sense that as long as the U.S. is a reserve currency, basically we can borrow as much as we want. But we may not be the reserve currency forever, and it's not a solution for every country. The idea that you have public money that's debt-free and you spend it responsibly into the economy, there's a limit. If the economy is operating at full capacity and you keep throwing money into it, you may get inflation, and that's a big problem. So these are all issues that, back in the 19th century, the populist movement, they used to have encampments, and these farmers and sharecroppers understood the money question.
Yes.
It was like the question of the day, and Wall Street was the enemy. Now people kind of eyes glaze over about this stuff, and they don't really get it. Like QE. Well, yeah. How many people maybe hear QE on the radio, but how many people actually know how to expand the money supply by selling bonds?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, he means quantitative easing, and you really haven't heard it. That's what QE is.
Yeah, quantitative easing.
All right, so here's what we do. I'm going to do a couple rapid fire questions here. We're going to be moving to 5:30, which we start breaking down. You guys want to come and talk to the panel? We're going to get picturing. You guys want to talk to the panelists while we're breaking down, and you can come in and get those questions in directly. So I'm just going to ask a couple quick rapid fire questions, and just start around and come down the road. Is there room in the Green New Deal if it's deemed necessary for nuclear power?
I probably couldn't properly answer that, because I haven't looked at it recently.
That's fine, Jeff.
Desirable, but not absolutely necessary.
Is there, Rogelio, do you think there should be room in the Green New Deal let me clarify. If we say that we find that through research that we can save a couple of years of getting off of carbon, is there room to green new deal with nuclear power?
I think solar and wind is preferable to nuclear.
Absolutely not. I've been fighting this nuclear power for 4 years. It'll slow us down. I mean, look at Vogel. The nuke subsidized by the Obama administration with loan guarantees. They started out at $8 billion. They're now at $30 billion. They're years behind. And with that $30 billion, we could have produced a lot more solar and wind than they're ever going to get from those nukes if they get completed.
Yeah.
And then you got to decommission them.
Yeah.
And those corporations will suck all the money and walk away, and the public's going to have to watch that nuclear waste for hundreds of thousands of years.
I love that passion. Please make sure you talk to Kathy and Steve about the nuclear waste that's buried right on the coast of Miami. That's going to be a huge problem as the slopes continue to rise.
And South Carolina Green Party is dealing with Savannah River.
Yeah.
They got a whole new thing with the nuclear weapons modernization, and they're going to be the source of the waste. And they already got a big problem from the last round, after World War II.
We'll start at this and this time, Howie, go back to you. This is my last question. It's not exactly Green Party related, but should the Green Party be afraid of the word socialism?
No.
No, and I think that what we have to do is to educate people on what socialism means, because sometimes it's because maybe it's prescribed or it's seen as a personality versus what it actually means. And so I deal with people sometimes that feel afraid of it, and I try to use. I hope I'm okay by taking this time. Illustrations such as Claudia Jones, who was there's a book called Left of Karl Marx. She was a black Marxist, but she talked about socialism. So we have to educate people on what socialism is and what it isn't.
I have to make one comment, is that like a lot of people in general, they're very ignorant. Like just in general, people I've talked to people that didn't know that slavery existed in Jamaica. I've talked to people that didn't know that like the United Kingdom had a prime minister. It's like this, a lot of ignorance is pervasive. And a lot of people think that like socialism is like synonymous with dictatorship or with like a repressive system, because they just don't know what the basic definition of socialism is. So people, yes.
But one thing is, based on polls, especially of younger people, I think the Green Party, well, I kind of like socialism, but I better not say the word. We're actually lagging behind a lot of the public.
All right, so I want to thank the panel. Starting down here at the end, we have Robin Harris, current female co-chair of the Green Party of Florida. We have Jeff Roby. Jeff Roby is the managing editor of GPFL.org. Rogelio is the assistant treasurer of the Green Party of Florida. And Howie Hawkins, longtime GP U.S. member, running for president, and he will be doing I'm sorry. Thank you for taking the time to come down here just as a person.
And LeBeau, who is our
Absolutely.
All right, so for us to be good citizens of Volusia County, we can get up here in 30 minutes. Yes.